Great to be back with you, and feel free if you're still eating your breakfast. That won't disturb me if you've got to get up and go get your next cup of coffee. I'm very excited for the session we're going to do today because it's in many ways a culmination of the content and experiences we've had up to this point. We're going to be addressing the question of trust. And as we do, I want you to think for a moment about the people who've had the greatest impact on your life. And then secondly, the people that you know you've had impact upon. So from both sides. And think for a moment about the role that trust in those relationships plays. It doesn't take long to see the connection between positive impact and trust, whether it's what we've received or what others have received from us. And when we think about trust, do we trust someone? Does someone trust us? Sometimes we think that that principle is just kind of a nebulous cloud. But it's actually quite quantifiable. And what we're going to do today is we're going to break down the components of trust. What is it that actually builds it, and what potentially could erode it? And as we look at this and dissect the concept of trust, we're going to see that it's actually something that we can do something about. We can build it. We can also erode it. And we're going to look at that, and I think coming out of this, you'll see some real practical application. It's very, very significant when we're dealing with this question. It matters everywhere. It matters in our family circle of influence, our work circles, if you're involved in the community in a volunteer group, coaching Little League or whatever that might be. Trust is a key ingredient. It's very, very important in a faith community like Plymouth Covenant, because no one here is here necessarily because you have to be. There's a sense of a volunteer choice that we've all made to be part of this. And because we're doing something so much deeper than just transactions with one another, trust is the fundamental glue upon which everything stands. And if we want to take this all the way to a direct biblical connection, trusting God is the foundation of our covenant relationship with Him. He has been trustworthy, and so we've invested our lives in that trust. And even at times when we bump up against questions and we wonder how He's working and what He's up to, we still fundamentally choose to trust because He's trustworthy. So trustworthiness, what are the ingredients of that? That's going to be our fundamental question today. And I think as we've done in the past, because of the nature of our work, we're actually preparing you with these principles in ways that you can make the biblical connection, but you won't see direct biblical language here because we want you to be able to take this outside of this room to the places where you're living your life. But the principles underneath this are actually the fundamental principles, Genesis to Revelation. God's trustworthy. He imparts into us the character that's trustworthy, and that's what holds everything together. So you'll see that in here, even though you'll have to do the translation work to take it back to, in essence, the source of where it's come from. So just a quick review where we've been to this point. We began our sessions looking at our own personal intelligent design. That God has actually woven into us reflections of His character, but for each of us, that's a unique formula. So white light is actually not white. Anybody that's taken sort of basic physics played with the little prism, maybe when you're in your 6th grade physics class, and you can break up that white light into its different elements of the color of light. It's not white, it's a combination of multiple different colors that are along the spectrum of what we term as light. And the character of God, He is light. God is light. In Him there's no darkness at all. But that aspect of His character is actually broken into various elements that He chooses to reflect differently in different individuals. So it's as the body of Christ comes together, we all carry almost a different spectrum of his character. We come together and we create the full picture of who Jesus is. And that's Paul's getting at that when he brings the analogy of the body. We all have different member expressions of who Jesus is. Some of us, Paul says, are the feet. Some of us are the ears. It takes the whole working together that creates the full picture of who Jesus is. So we looked actually at that element, that God's created a unique, almost spectrum specificity in our own personalities. We all have different gifts. We all have different expressions, and it's woven actually into the very unique design of our lives. That's partly genetic. We're born with a certain way that our brains work. We respond emotionally in certain ways. Those are all things that were woven actually into the very fundamental design. Then God weaves together on top of that life experiences, things that we've experienced in the ways we were raised, our family, the birth order that we were in, the life stage that we're in. Those all become a nurture influence. And then finally, there's choices that we make. So nature, nurture, choice work together. God is involved in every one of those to create this unique design that's as fundamentally precious and individual as a snowflake. Snowflakes are all unique, but there's only so many patterns that crystals can flow into. So there's common crystal patterns, but unique expressions of those patterns. And that's very much the way that our individual lives have been designed by God. So we'll see common patterns. There's certain individuals that are like other individuals. And that's what we looked at when we looked at that first session, when we gave 4 letters to the different types of people. But then those types are filtered through the unique experiences of nurture and the choices that we've all made. We then, the last time I was with you, took that and carried it over into team communication. Okay, how do different individuals work together on teams? And we used an analogy of voices. So with that, we took those 16 fundamental different personality types, folded them together into families, 5 families, that we actually have paralleled to Ephesians 4, apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, and evangelists. That's not language that we bring when I take this into a public school district, or I take it into the state of Minnesota office, or a large company, or a family business. We use different language. So for the apostle personality voice, we use the word pioneer. For the evangelist, the one who makes connections, we use connector. For the prophetic, the one who just has that sense of the ideal, the way things ought to be, we use the word creative. For the pastor, the one who tends or shepherds, cares for people, we use the word nurturer. And for the teacher, the one who is committed to keeping the banks on the river, to keeping us true to principles, we use the word guardian. And all of those voices are embedded in all of us, whether we're redeemed and are acknowledging Jesus as Lord. We use the example of Paul. Before he was even a Christian, he was functioning apostolically to try to design a way by which he could destroy the church. Right? Then he beats Jesus, and all of those same natural gifts and principles are then employed to build the church. He was an apostle before he, in that sense, was even an apostle. So we talked about that and worked together to arrive at an understanding of our own individual voice. What voice do we bring to the table when we're working on a team? And we've been, over the last weeks now, it's been a little while since I've been here because we had to move the dates. But you've had the opportunity to start thinking in this way in your team dynamics. What voice is coming up when we're asking this particular question? And to know what contribution we each make as individuals and the contributions that those on our team are making. So we're going to build off of those 2 fundamental principles up to this point. Where did I go? There we go. That we have an intelligent design as individuals. We're put on a team to play a particular role. And now we're going to build off of that and talk about what elements need to be in place for effective communication, effective decision making. And it comes down to this word trust. A lot of recent research sociologically and in leadership circles right now on trust and the importance of that. It gets back to character. What's amazing is that now a lot of the research, I've got colleagues that are involved with this. I've been involved as a social researcher. And so much comes back to the principle, the principle of virtue and trust. And it's not necessarily been a popular approach to take in the marketplace or in the kinds of worlds that many of us are used to addressing. But what's coming back now is that the science is showing that this element of trust actually is the greatest predictor of whether things work or whether they don't work. So we're actually going to talk about that, and it's something you can very boldly take with you to wherever you're orbiting. You can take this principle of trust because it stands up under the rigor of practical reality and of scientific research. So shall we go there? All right, you've got two pieces of documentation here that you can use to follow through our presentation. The first is, this is just a digested version of what you're going to see up on the screen, and you can take that with you, and it'll trigger your memory from some of the things we're going to look at and talk about. This is then a workbook where you can take notes, and I'll actually, similar to what we did when we did the voices, I'll be asking you to make some decisions and to be looking a little bit closely at yourself and at other people and at your team and making some evaluations. And then I'll turn you loose periodically here throughout the morning to do some discussions around your table. So as we've been operating up to this point, I need you to dive in with your teams this morning and get your hands dirty, so to speak, in the real life issues that you're dealing with. And that's how we learn best as adults. It doesn't work best if I just stand up here and unload a bunch of principles. The more you can put it to work in real life, whether that's the actual situations in your church world or even bringing in things from outside, you can certainly bring that into the discussions this morning as well. So reviewing the fundamental principle of leadership that's expressed in this visual tool, you have in your notebook a copy of the visual tools that we use. They're models or paradigms. Sometimes they're someone's doctoral dissertation or a book that someone wrote. We've digested those down into visuals because our brains remember things better than if we had, a 5,000-word essay on the support challenge matrix. We wouldn't remember that nearly as well as we do this picture, which is a simple 4-quadrant matrix that leadership or influence is comprised of a healthy balance of challenge and support. Challenge is clarity, accountability, and someone in a position with authority and responsibility saying, here's what needs to be done, and you're held accountable for that. That's clear and effective challenge. Support then is saying, now, what resources can I help provide or ensure that you have access to that will allow you to be able to fulfill that which is challenged in front of you? So it's support and challenge together. That support is emotional, it's financial, it's resources, it's information, anything that you need to do that which you're held responsible to execute. So good leadership is knowing how to balance those two things together in a really healthy way. And it's going to be different based on every relationship that you're with. Kind of using a family example, my wife and I have 4 children, and they're really different. It's like you look at these people and how did they come from the same gene pool? They're so different in terms of how they approach life. They have common values, they had a common experience raised in our family, but boy, do they make decisions differently. That's because they're unique expressions of being created in the image of God. They need different support and different challenge formula, each of them. So 2 sons I have there. We have 2 girls and then 2 boys. And our 2 sons are exact opposite personalities in terms of those 4 letters. One is an ESFP and the other is an INTJ. The INTJ son, our youngest, is the chess player, calculating, strategic, always thinking, looking 4 or 5 steps out in everything that he's calculating, and that's how he approaches life. The other son is, he'd say when he's in high school, hey, Mom and Dad, I'm going to have a few friends over on Friday night. And that meant like 50 kids were showing up at our house. He's the center of this whole extended family of loyalty that he created. So different than our other son. When I bring support and challenge to Michael, our youngest, it's in a different expression than when I bring support and challenge to Matthew. Now they're both young men now, and so I have a different role as a dad. But as they were growing up, I couldn't treat them the same. Right? Leadership needed to look differently based on how they were receiving support and challenge. And we have to, as leaders, be able to make that calculation, know ourselves. I had to know what my own tendencies were, as well as to know what the tendencies of those that we're trying to influence. And so with this picture, we're expressing that principle. We have to know where we start in our own instinct. And my own instinct is when I get under a little bit of pressure, I'm going to land right there. Okay? All the nice stuff goes away, right? I drop away the support and I elevate the challenge. Anybody that's worked with me knows that that's a tendency. So knowing that tendency, if I'm going to grow as a leader, what does that probably mean? What do I need to work on? I need to work on knowing I better add support, particularly when I get under stress. And if I'm conscious of that, I can back off, I can take a breath, I can control my body language, I can slow things down, and that'll change the effect of the experience of being on the other side of me. And we believe that human beings are responsible for their actions, and when we're equipped and empowered with that information, then we're able to make adjustments. So walking in humility, a humility-based leadership posture means I'm responsible to know what happens when I get under stress. I then can change and deliberately add more support. One of my colleagues who I work with lives up in Alexandria. We do a lot of work together, a lot of work with the state of Minnesota. And he's exact opposite from my personality. And he lands in the protector quadrant. He's all support and low challenge. So he gets under a little bit of stress. Nicest guy. All right, but he is prone toward trying to create peace every place he goes. So whenever there's stress, he's the one that'll like, well, I'll do the dishes in the office kitchen, right? I know it's somebody else's responsibility, but I don't want to make waves. I'm the opposite. Like when something like that happens, right, I'll bring challenge, and who cares what it sounds like to anybody? So both of us have to grow the opposite direction. My growth as a leader is going to be north. His growth is going to be east. And so it's why in our approach, we don't say there's one path to leadership development. You have to know yourself and then grow proportionately in the direction that's going to be most unlike where you naturally land. And you bring that to a Christian principle. Sanctification will be the pressure of the Holy Spirit in light of the principles of the Word of God in the areas that we're not naturally like Jesus. All right, so isn't that interesting that Jesus is going to always say the hardest thing to every one of us? Because there's areas that we're sort of naturally like him, and then there's areas where we are most naturally unlike him. And it's going to be in the areas where we need to grow that the pressure is going to be applied. Support challenge matrix. So this basic principle is going to be a foundation of our discussion about trust today. So maximizing influence is where we're going today. How do we maximize influence that we have on other people? How do we minimize that which would erode influence? And how do we help other people understand how best to influence us? Maximizing influence on both sides of the equation is where we want to go today, and to do it deliberately and to bring influence in as healthy way as possible. We've all known people who have influence over others but don't do it in a healthy way. Maybe they create compliance of actions around them, but that's done out of fear and manipulation. That's not healthy or maximum influence. So what we actually want to talk about today is how do we bring influence in a moral, ethical way that's also very effective. Influence is that capacity to affect the character, development, and behavior of someone else And to do that, we would add in an ethical way based on a principle of what a human being is. So the advantage actually that those of us that operate out of a biblical framework is that we have an understanding of what human beings actually are, which we would say, to anybody who's a follower of Jesus and tries to build their life out of the Word of God, what do we think a human being is? Somebody. A human being, when you see a human being, no matter whether they're walking with Jesus or not, whether their lives are reflecting his destiny or not, you might see somebody out on the street or somebody who's expressing their life in a way that's not healthy in any measure. Nevertheless, we look at them as what? Someone created in the image of God. Wow. See, that then, with that fundamental premise, changes the way we influence. Right? That basic worldview changes the way we choose to leverage power in a situation. And power comes from positions, it comes from our personalities, but there is ethical, biblical way to leverage influence. Now, when I go into some of the worlds I go in, I can't bring that language of, hey, people are created in the image of God, because it sets off fire alarms. So what we have to do is still bring this basic understanding of dignity. We're approaching people from a position of dignity, which is language that I'd use in most of the contexts that I live in. But I know for myself where that's coming from. Does that make sense? And basically approaching people from a position of dignity, when I'm dealing with anyone, I'm dealing with somebody created in the image of God, and the free will of an individual, something that God doesn't even cross over. He respects us so much that he's not going to abridge that position of dignity. That changes the way we understand influence and leadership. So, all good? All right. If I'm plowing too fast here, or you've got a question, or we're a small enough group, you can raise your hand and interrupt me, and it won't take us off course. All right. Here's another model. It's in your notebook as a picture of trust. We call it the influence model, and we're going to spend a good portion, like kind of the first half of the morning, vetting out this picture. It's actually a story, and what I'd like you to do is take a look at it just as an individual and see if you can tell the story that this picture is relaying. So take a look at it. You won't get it perfectly, but you'll see certain elements in here, and then we're going to pull this apart and look at this, because there's a whole book actually that was written, and then we've digested the principles in that into this picture. So take a look at it. I'm going to give you just about 30 seconds. See if you can tell the story. Here's a little clue. Follow the green arrows. All right, now just very quickly circle up with one or two people, maybe the three of you. Some of your tables are just three people. And I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to just share with each other a few insights that you see out of this picture. And then we'll dig into it more. But I want you to see what you can pull out on your own. All right. We're going to have more chance to talk into this principle throughout the morning. But anybody want to just take a stab at sharing some principles that are embedded in this picture? Let's start with that. Anybody bold enough? Any of our extroverts want to pipe in and think out loud here? Oh, come on, you guys. Sure, just see what you can do with it. I know I'm putting you at a significant disadvantage because you haven't heard any of this, but see what you can do with this.
So to break out of the mold, I'm an introvert, and I'll
Okay.
tell you.
That's good. Congratulations.
So I innately have character and chemistry, and when I have transactions with the world around me, it helps me see what my confidence and credibility levels are.
Okay.
And the more I do that, the more trust I build in who I am and what I'm capable of doing. I have relationship with others and I have influence and impact.
Not bad. Anybody want to add anything to that? That's actually pretty good. Okay. Oh, this is good. Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. We could go home now. Because between these two, they've basically landed at the gist of what we're going to do this morning. So, and you actually touched on, I think both of you, by highlighting certain things that are natural to us. We recognize, this is why we build off of our first session, and then we build off of the voices, because what we're going to do today is we're going to show, and I think you'll see this, it'll instinctively kind of resonate with you, that character, chemistry, competency, and credibility, which are the elements of the equation of trust. If those elements are there, we can step forward into a relationship of trust with someone, and they can with us. But voices, different voices, value character and chemistry, competency, and credibility at different scales. And when we have a particular voice, people will naturally trust some elements, and they'll question others in us. We have to know what that is. So let's look at that a little more closely. If you notice the little, green, yellow, and red stoplights up at the top, that is to the point of we make a choice about getting across just a transactional relationship over into much deeper influences and impact level of relationship. And both sides have to do that. So you got two people here, one on one side, one on the other. Both sides have walls of self-preservation, which is the question of, like, am I going to get snipped at or worse in this exchange? So we cautious have a little bit of self-preservation. Nothing wrong with that. Self-preservation is an instinct God put in us to keep us safe. But there are times when we have to make a judgment. Is that self-preservation instinct accurate, or are we imagining a risk or a danger that we need to get over? So both sides have to get over that to have true, genuine, what we would term a kind of synergistic, cooperative relationship with each other. Where we're going to start on this is looking at the left side of that equation. Yeah? Yeah, that's a really good point, is actually this formula, the person on the here has the same formula on the other side. So it's relative to the relationship. Everybody's got to go through the same thing, right? So this person becomes a me with someone else. They just each have to have their own, if that makes sense. That's a great observation. Okay, but let's go to the left side of the formula. And we're going to look at building trust. What is this thing that we call trust? We all use that word almost all the time. We think it if we don't say it. In every situation, in every encounter we have with another human being, we are calculating, do I trust this situation? Do I trust this individual? And to the extent that we trust, we step out and take risks. Okay, I went and filled my car up with gasoline before I drove from Vadnais Heights over here this morning. And I stuck my credit card into the gas pump. Was that a step of trust? Absolutely. I'm trusting that certain things are in place. Number one, that whatever information that computer in there grabbed, they're not going to misuse it somewhere else. Right? That's a big step of trust, isn't it? I'm also trusting that when the gauge runs and says, I just paid for 11.5 gallons of gasoline, that's actually what I was getting. Right? There's a Bureau of Standards in Washington, D.C., and they have there, inside of a vault somewhere, the official gallon of the United States. And everything has to be measured against, the Bureau of Standards has, this is a gallon. What would happen if you didn't have that? Well, one gas station would say, well, this is my definition of a gallon. And another would say, well, this is my definition, in which case you could have no commerce. That's actually been a problem and is in many places around the world where there's no common standard and therefore no easy access to trust. So what would happen if the gas station owner says, well, this is just, that's my gallon, and another guy says, well, that's my gallon. Does that sound familiar? Is there any objective morality in the world? Well, there has to be. And therefore, if someone says, well, that's your standard of truth and that's my standard of truth, the moment we start going there, we start eroding ultimately the standard upon which trust is built. So we're making trust transactions all the time. Transactions are actually a really good thing, and we live our lives constantly making these balances between how far am I going to extend trust, and we're making that evaluation whether we are conscious of it or not. What we're suggesting is that trust is not just a nebulous feeling that we either have or don't have. Trust is actually, and this is what the research would say, as well as I think you'll see experientially in your own life, this would resonate. It is character plus chemistry plus competency plus credibility. When those four elements are in place, then I am willing to extend trust to the individual who I evaluate has character, has chemistry, has competency, has credibility. And to the extent that those four are complete in my evaluation, I'm willing to do an exchange. Right? If I go into that same grocery store or that same gas station and I buy a gallon of milk, I've just bought a gallon of gasoline, I'm buying a gallon of milk, I'm walking up to the counter, I am putting the gallon of milk, giving my credit card once again to them, they're running that. I'm believing, once again, in the character of whoever set the price on that milk, that it actually is milk, that it has the date that they say it expires. I'm not going through a character, chemistry, competency, and credibility evaluation consciously. I just do it unconsciously, and that's why I'm willing to make that exchange and make that transit. We do that all the time. But you take out one of those elements, and suddenly what happens when we are about to go do a transaction? It's like, something's not right here. And trust begins to get eroded. What we want to do this morning is actually look at breaking character, chemistry, competency, and credibility. So if we feel intuitively that trust isn't there, we know where to look and how to fix it. If somebody doesn't trust us, it's not just a kind of nebulous thing. There's something missing in the way we are communicating with them, and there's a reason why that trust back to us isn't there. Yes?
So I think sometimes in churches where you assume that everybody has character, that they think alike, there are people who don't
What a great segue. That's actually why we're going to go through the time this morning. It's what do we actually do? How do we turn what's often a very unconscious process? How do we turn that more into a conscious process? And even in an environment like this, begin to look at being a little more intentional about looking at these things without becoming mechanical. That's not what we're trying to do. So, great question. Here's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to look at these filters of trust: character, chemistry, competency, and credibility, and break them down a little bit in definitions. And then we're going to overlay these onto the voice tendencies and personality tendencies that each of us have. Some of us in the room are going to value character in the trust equation higher than others of us will. For some of us, it's competency. That's going to be like the thing that matters most to us. And what we need to do is recognize this in ourselves and then know ultimately what is it that people are going to trust most naturally in us as individuals, and what areas of these four are going to be the ones that they're going to struggle with most in trusting us. Because none of us are Jesus, right? Character. The trust related to character is this an individual of integrity? Integrity is there consistency and congruity between your words and your actions and your intentions? Character. Chemistry. Is there a connection here? Do you have the capacity to actually relate to other human beings? And does communication flow easily? Is there listening? Do I feel that you have the ability to elevate the relationship? It's a key element in trust. Somebody could be a person of character, but if they don't have the capacity to develop relationships, then they actually are eroding or undermining their own influence because they're locking all of that inside of themselves and not able to reach out to others. Competency. Do they know what they're talking about? Are they communicating clearly and confidently with proper humility the fact that they know what they're talking about? Competency is a very important part of trust. I'll try to think of an example here. If I go to my financial advisor, okay, I have to believe he's a man of character, which he is. I have to believe chemistry, he can actually talk to me and explain a world that I don't necessarily understand in a way that I can understand it. I also have to believe he knows what he's talking about. I don't want my dentist, who has another competency, right, to be my financial advisor. He might be an amateur and pretty good at it, but I'm not going to go to him with those questions. And then likewise, credibility is, can that individual take what they know and apply it to my world? That's credibility, is what they're saying credible to me. So character, chemistry, competency, and credibility all work together, and they all have to be in play for full influence to be fully active and not eroded. Character is this an individual of integrity? And people are asking that about us. Chemistry, do we actually enjoy spending time? Is there an ability to resonate? Competency, do they know what they're talking about? And credibility, can they apply that to my reality and actually help me solve a problem? Any questions on how we're defining those? Okay. How we unlock influence then is see that character, chemistry, competency, and credibility function like sequential filters. That word sequential is important. Character ultimately is like the first filter through the door. They work together to create the possibility of true relationship, and we have to unlock all four of them to unlock influence. So if we're trying to be a person of legitimate influence, we have to know these criteria or filters in our own lives. And if we're trying to understand people's influence upon us, we have to also understand it on the other side. It works on both sides of that influence model. Okay. So here's what we're going to do now. We're going to move to a little evaluation back to our voices. So what I want you to think back to was the voice order. You might have to look back into your notebook. The voice order that you came up with out of our questions that we ask: nurture, creative, guardian, connector, and pioneer. Which was the strongest or most natural voice for you to speak and to hear, and which was the least natural? And then we kind of put that in an order. That's going to be a pretty fundamental baseline for our discussions today. And what we want to do is fold back the questions for the guardian, for the nurturer, for the creative, for the pioneer, for the connector. Which elements, character, chemistry, competency, and credibility, are easiest, and which are the most challenging? All right? So we're going to need to get our brains elastic this morning and think a little bit. But I think you'll find this is a pretty significant exercise when it comes to understanding trust. So green. The green criteria is, as we're talking about this, you're gonna come to the conclusion, nope, that's absolutely no barrier or hesitance. It doesn't erode trust in this case. Yellow, it's a potential barrier for relationship, and red would be, no, that's definitely a barrier or a danger in the relationship when it comes to trust. So here's the way we're going to do it. The nurturers. How many first voice nurturers in the room? Raise your hand high so we can all know who you are. It's really important to know who your nurturers are. And it doesn't matter what organization you're in. It could be a church. It could be an accounting firm, which are doing very different things, right? The nurturers are the oil in the organization. They're the ones that keep the fluidity of relationships moving. And really, really important. They are the champions of relational harmony, values, people, fairness, equality. I was just this 2 weeks ago with a manufacturing plant in Portland, Maine. And they make paper cups like this. They may actually do this one. I don't know. It looks like on the surface what that company does is make stuff, which they do. And they ship their stuff all over the place. But actually what they are doing is they're people working with people who work with machines who load things on trucks that send stuff out. At the end of the day, it's a people business. Everything is. Everything's a people business. Even if you're a manufacturing company, it's not just churches that are people businesses. And nurturers play a huge, huge value. 43% of the general population are first voice nurturers. That's about the percentage we've got in the room. It's a pretty natural breakdown. They are the stewards or champions of people getting along, remembering why we're here, remembering values, fairness, equality. Everybody needs to be heard. We love our nurturers, right? Is that true? Nurturers, you're important. You're the quietest voice. That is, in the sense that least likely to push your voice forward to remind everybody how important you are, because you wouldn't want to do that. That would be like imposing. But the rest of us see it, and we need to learn to pull you up to the place where your voice is heard. So the question now is character, chemistry, competency, and credibility. What aspect of those four elements do the nurturers do very well, and which aspect maybe is a little bit of a struggle for them? Here's the little game we're going to play. Okay, we're going to look at, if you see nurture, the catalog, character, chemistry, competency, and credibility. What color are we going to give each of those trust elements? What color are we going to assign to the nurture? I'm going to give you the first color for each of them. Clearly, character, we're going to give the nurturers a thumbs up. Anybody want to argue with that? Do we trust these people as fundamentally for other people? Do they mean what they say and say what they mean? They're usually not going to be self-seeking individuals. Is that true? So on an individual basis, that you can still have some nasty characters who are nurturers. But as a voice, on the whole, this voice is generally for other people. Do you get that? So we're not going to distrust that element in them. Make sense? So we're going to give you green on that one. However, there are three other elements that we need to ask the honest question. How do nurturers fare when it comes to chemistry? What color would you give that? When it comes to competence, and these are the definitions. So, do I trust you? Are you a person of integrity? We're going to say yes. Chemistry, do I like you? Can I connect easily with you? Do I enjoy spending time with you? What color are you going to give that? You're going to give it green, yellow, red, or a color in between, like green, yellow, or yellow, red. Competency, are you competent? And here's key, are you confident in the way you communicate that competence? Do you have a proven track record of success? And then credibility, can you take that competence, apply it with boldness to solve someone else's problem? Here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to, in your group, come up with a consensus on the color you're going to give the nurturers on each of those three. Go at it.